Okay, so we're going to talk for a little bit, and then I want you all to be very attentive so you can ask your questions in bold voices, and you should be thinking about them as we move along. I'm a little hoarse, so I'm going to put this really close to me. It's obviously strange for me to be interviewing both of you, but you're going to help me out and tell me when I've asked a very stupid question. Don, let's start with you. You had told me, and I think it's kind of fitting that we start with you because your chapter has been one of the ones people talk about the most, and I think you're aware of that. And one of the wonderful things about going around the country for Stars of David and talking about it is hearing the conversations that it started among readers of the book, and it's also, I think, started conversations among some of the people in the book. And Don wanted to start with, I think, a statement, and we'll kind of go from there because he had, I guess you wanted to clarify some of the thoughts you made.
You know, it's a very delicate subject. I came here tonight with a certain amount of trepidation that what I said in my chapter of your book about being nonconformist Jewish was offensive to Jews who live very happily accepting what I question. And just as sure as I'm sitting here, a lot of them think I'm running away from being Jewish. Well, the fact is that as the ingenue in Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein's Flower Drum song proclaims loud and clear, I enjoy being a girl, I enjoy being a Jew. A questioning one, to be sure, who believes that asking questions is in itself Jewish and gets more answers and is turned on more by Sholem Aleichem stories than Bible stories, and quells, if I can use that word, at that master of Jewish folklore story of a Jew named Wunsch Schweig, who lived such a selfless life in Tsarist Russia that when he died and went to heaven, God greeted him personally and informed him that as a reward for all he had done down on earth to help his fellow man, he would grant him any wish he desired, to which Wunsch Schweig replied, maybe every morning I could have a fresh roll and butter. And that tears me up. Anyway, that's my kind of Jewish. As is the story of two Jews before a firing squad being offered blindfolds, and one of them saying, no blindfold, and the other saying, don't make trouble. Well, making trouble is what Jews like me and Morley and Abigail do best, so let's get on with it.
Okay. Before we leave that statement, I want to just follow up on, you started by saying it's a complicated, it's a tricky, sensitive area. What do you see? What is so sensitive about it, in your opinion? And why do you have a sense that other Jews are judging Jews? And can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think there are, Jewishness runs the whole gamut. And if you don't come from one particular part of the gamut, there are other people who wonder what's wrong with you. And actually, I don't think there's anything wrong with any of us. But we all have different takes on what being Jewish is, what being Jewish means, and just the fact that I don't particularly get anything out of rituals and observances and feel it more in my bones. I think that there are people who wonder, what's the matter with that guy? Well, as the evening goes on, you'll find out what's the matter with that guy.
You know, you keep saying it's controversial or sensitive. I just don't think it is. I think that one of the joys of being Jewish is this constant rubbing up, this constant argument. I mean, that is really it's so central to who it is we are that. You know, he can't excommunicate him because he doesn't want to go to shul, for God's sake. Although I would like to excommunicate him most of the time. I mean, the joy of this is that there is not really a hierarchy. You are the entire hierarchy yourself, and that's how I've always felt about Judaism. You know, I guess I am, in a sense, a person of deep faith. My friend Kurt Vonnegut loves to quote Nietzsche, who says it's only a person of deep faith who can afford the luxury of skepticism. And I think that is so central to who we are.
You must be aware, though, of this. There has been discussion, and there's often a certain sense of who is the real Jew, or who is that observance matters, that ritual is...
That's an argument only made by Jews with each other. I don't think the world is waiting for an answer to that question. I think that at times like these, those questions become more central, I think, to Jews and maybe to non-Jews as well, as we see what's happening in the world. And we're going through a particularly nasty time right now. And I think that's when these questions do come to the forefront, and we really ask ourselves who we are.
Well, let's back up a little bit just so people who haven't read the book know each of your kind of Jewish resume. Don, how did you grow up? What did you have growing up? And were you? I think you were confirmed, not bar mitzvah, but
I was
tell us
confirmed.
where you grew
When
up.
I was confirmed, it was like you can't believe what happened. Because I was on track team in Interracial High School, they got me to run for the Catholic Youth Organization. And my picture was in the Interracial Standard Star the day before the confirmation with a big cross on the front of my uniform. And the sisterhood had an emergency meeting to see whether they were going to let me be confirmed or not. And I won. They let me have it. But I also remember the great day that my aunt came to the confirmation and said later that somebody was looking over the program with all the names, and a woman behind her said, "Donald Shepard Hewitt? How did he get in here?" So, I mean, I got in there because I wanted to be in there. And but it was reform.
You went to Hebrew school? You did go to Hebrew school?
I did not go to Hebrew school. I don't speak any Hebrew. I love Yiddish, but I don't speak any Hebrew.
And why the name change? How did that happen? What was it?
My grandfather's name was Hurwitz. He came here early in the 20th century, was an insurance salesman, lived in Massachusetts, and at one point wanted to change his name, and he picked the name Hurley, which the whole family told him, you can't be Hurley from Hurwitz, so pick something else, and he picked Hewitt, and that's what it is. And it doesn't seem to be a big thing in my life that it's Hewitt or Hurwitz or anything else. It doesn't matter much to me.
Did you have Hurwitz relatives, though, growing up? Were there still Hurwitzes around?
No, but they were all very Jewish. Everybody in my family was very Jewish, and not Orthodox Jews, but Jewish. And nobody was trying to run away from it, and nobody ever denied they were. And we all, I went to Jewish camps. Most of my friends were Jewish. I seem to gravitate toward non-believing everybody, non-believing Jews mostly. And why that is, I don't know, but I do.
I want to revisit that. Morley, your upbringing?
It was fair. My upbringing, it was a largely Jewish part of the city of Toronto that we were born in, which was in what would now be called poverty, the poorest part of town. My family was not severely Orthodox, but we kept kosher.
Severely?
Not severely.
But you did keep
I never
kosher.
heard that.
We kept kosher. I was bar mitzvah. I think I became less observant post bar mitzvah because I, after all, was a man. We've always been, the family has been very engaged in Judaism, not particularly observant except for the obvious Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. We always have a Seder in our house. I think there are more non-Jews at the Seder than there are Jews. And it's the non-Jews who always start calling a couple of weeks before Pesach, wanting to know if they're invited. It's really quite interesting to me. No, I'm quite serious. There's a certain, almost a twinge of envy about that particular ritual, which is is really quite interesting because it's such a family thing. I mean, in the sense of it's the Jewish version of Thanksgiving in a certain way, food, all of that, and one of those fairly rare Jewish occasions that does not commemorate something but celebrate something.
Do you run the Seder? Are you?
Yeah, yeah. I run a much better Seder than my father ran. It's much quicker.
And
it's in Hebrew and English, mainly English.
And you don't work on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? You don't
No.
Did you, when you were traveling, when you were in Vietnam, what did you do about those days? Do you remember?
In Vietnam, I did work. It was interesting. I was in Singapore once on Yom Kippur, and it's a funny story. Singapore, which is, as you know, is on the equator, right on the equator, and I asked in the hotel if there was a synagogue around. They said, yes, there is. Where to go? And I called the synagogue, and the Chinese guy answered the phone. And he was the shamus, I guess. And I said, excuse me, I'd like to know what time services start. And he said, same, all the time, 5 o'clock. I said, what do you mean? He said, same, all the time, 5 o'clock. It's on the equator.
That's a great story. Did you go?
I went, and it was quite interesting. And the man who seemed to be the president of the Senate, and it had the most extraordinary, every skin complexion you have ever seen at that service. And the man who seemed to be running it was a sort of brown-headed, bullet-headed man, very elegant, beautifully cut suit. And I went over, and we were all smoking outside, waiting for 5 o'clock. And I went over and introduced myself, and I asked him where he was from, and he said, I'm from Afghanistan. My family's from Afghanistan. And I said, really? How long had your family been in Afghanistan? And he said, oh, about 800 years.
That's a great story. So what about children, Don? Did your kids get a Jewish education at all, or no, nothing at all? Do you think that they call themselves Jews today?
They're very Jewish in spirit, in sharing their life with others. My daughter and son-in-law have no formal religion. I don't ever remember, after I was confirmed, having a formal religion. And yet I feel it. I don't partake of the rituals and the ceremonies because they just don't do much for me, and I don't know why, but they don't. But down deep, I feel it.
When you say the rituals don't do anything for you, is it the fact that they're kind of, that you feel the prayers don't have words that speak to you? Is it the music? I mean, do you feel like there's anything that could have kind of hooked you in more at any point, or do you feel like ritual of any kind was going to leave you cold?
I always figured, I guess if I were a Catholic or a Buddhist or a Protestant, I probably would feel the same way as I feel now. It just, for reasons I don't know, it just doesn't appeal. I have no problem with it appealing to the people. If they get consolation from it, if they get joy from it, I think that's marvelous. I don't. I mean, it almost comes down to the story I think I told you about. I used to go out with a Catholic girl when I was a kid, and we used to argue about religion all the time. And one day she said to me, okay, you've got to admit that the Easter service at St. Patrick's is beautiful. And I said, okay, I will admit that the Easter service at St. Patrick's is beautiful, if you will admit that Radio City Music Hall does it better. And I always thought that's what a lot of it's theater. I have no problem with it being theater. I think it's great. I think it's great theater. But I like Second Avenue Jewish Yiddish theater better.
Well, I have to say I heard that from a number of people in the book, and even a number of my contemporaries feel like synagogue is not where they're going to hook in. But for you, Morley, you do go, and can you talk about what you...
See, I honestly feel that, look, you can be whatever you want. It doesn't matter to me. I don't want to try and run anyone else's life. But I think if you're going to reject something, you should know what you're rejecting. I mean, just to reject something out of hand, without having experienced it, without knowing it, without having read it. And for example, I think Don confuses God with Judaism, and it's an interesting point. For example, most of the prayers and most of the commentaries in Yom Kippur have nothing to do with God. They have to do with human behavior. And I think, and there's a certain beauty in much of that language. I confess that when I say certain beauty in the language, it's in the English language. And I find that taking that good part of a day, I mean, it doesn't have to be in a synagogue, of just reading, of talking, of reading about human behavior, human conduct, morality, the way we all wish we really were. I'm not sitting there bashing my heart. I'm sitting thinking, really. And I find that it can be awfully refreshing.
You told me you fast except for coffee.
Except for coffee.
What about...
That would be
cruel.
Well, it would be cruel to everyone else around me, too, as well.
You know, as far as synagogue, I think I quelled more and felt more at Fiddler on the Roof than I feel I mean, that to me was an expression of Judaism that knocked me out.
That never existed.
Whether it existed or not. How do you know the other stuff existed?
What other
You know, I said what other stuff? I was at a thing the other day. We were discussing.
When I say what the Fiddler on the Roof shtetl is a total fiction.
Oh, Tito, I loved it.
Well, that's fine if you know. What was interesting about those shtetls is that they were hotbeds seething with politics, seething with the politics of that time, which was, you know, the great age of anxiety. Yeah, and there were militant women's groups, and there were anti-prostitution campaigns, and anti-syphilis campaigns, and nutrition campaigns, and how you really should feed your babies. They weren't people sitting around dancing and wishing they were somewhere else.
Yeah, but on that very subject, the other day I was at a meeting done by Court TV, looking at Oprah Winfrey getting taken by a book that was never fact-checked. And I said, come on, the greatest bestseller in the world, the Bible. I don't know if anybody ever fact-checked that one either.
Don, I want to go back, and both of you have said that in terms of feeling anti-Semitism as a kid or growing up, you said you never felt discriminated against, but there was always the undertone that you could be.
Worse than that. The only anti-Semitism I really felt deeply when I lived in New Rochelle was Jewish anti-Semitism. My father had come from Russia. He was not acceptable at certain golf clubs in Westchester. He played golf with clients of his at Wingfoot, the New York Athletic Club, but couldn't get into Sunningdale or Metropolis because he was a Russian Jew. And I grew up really resenting that. Mm-hmm. I resent Jewish anti-Semitism. And I don't ever remember any Gentile anti-Semitism that cut as deep as that did.
Morley, you had talked about being aware of it.
Oh, yeah, very much. This was in Canada. It wasn't all that much different than here, I suppose. And the neighborhood I lived in they were mixed.
Can you all hear Morley?
Can you hear me? I'm sorry. Jewish, Italian, English, Scottish, Irish section. And there were fights and gangs and stuff like that. And, you know, I got a few bloody noses, and I hope I gave a few. But also, I mean, there were obvious things like the quotas at the university and college. There were very, very open, barefaced quotas in medical schools, for example. There were what do they call, restricted areas where Jews could not buy land or that kind of thing. So that one was aware of it. I mean, it wasn't vicious, open, hostile, but it was pernicious.
And how do you
That's all changed up there.
How do you think it affected you, even maybe subconsciously? Do you think that it shaped you at all in terms of a sense of having to, withstand
Well, I think it's hard for me to define, really, because one doesn't know all the forces that create the person who I am. You can only guess. And it's also, you must remember, during World War II and all that, almost all of the remnants of my father's family were wiped out. So all of those things played into who you are, how you think, how you look at the world, really. And I think that it just, maybe I'm just a dinosaur, but I think that it always can happen again. I really do believe that. And almost everywhere, almost anywhere, I do think it can happen again.
Why do you say that?
Because it keeps happening.
Don, do you feel that way?
No. No.
Do you have any sense of sort of peril around the corner, or that there is that the
I think it's
pieces-
peril around every corner for everybody. I mean, I don't think the Muslims are any more a threat to Jews than they are to everybody. So I can't zero in on that particularly, because I think what's going on now and the bit with the cartoons and the whole thing, I think that's a threat to civilization, not necessarily to Judaism.
What about the sense that you had talked about, that there is something about, we'll show them, that there was, that maybe it wasn't so religious for you, but there was a sense, nobody's going to say no to us. We're going to do it. I'm going to do it. That kind of steeled you in a sense.
Yeah, there wasn't any overt anti-Semitism, but there was sort of it was beneath the surface, and I think most Jews are successful because they want to show their non-Jewish neighbors, don't play with us, kid. We got it made, and we're going to keep it made. And I never really felt any real discrimination, as I say, except there was that German-Russian baloney that really affected me more and I thought about more.
And you never felt like you were like on the outside looking in, that you were out of the club?
No, I was lucky. Luck plays a very big part in people's lives, and luck played a big part in mine. I always said I got further on less than anybody I ever knew, and everything just fell in. I don't know why. All the pieces fit, and to this day I have no idea why.
Morley, you said that when you went to Germany for the first time for the CBC, that it was a really, it was important experience.
This was not long after the war, and so I really did, and I remember just taking the bus from the plane at Frankfurt Airport. This was in the 50s, and thinking, God, suppose this was 10 years ago. So it's something that was just so much in my mind at that first initial, looking at faces, wondering about people. They were middle-aged people, all the right age, if you know what I mean.
And
Yes.
and when you were reporting, it was obviously sort of at the earlier part of your career, but
Well, look, I don't think it's any great trick, and I think that any decent journalist can do it. you report, you just you use a different part of your brain when you're reporting, and you don't let any personal animosities or bad memories or any play into it. Otherwise, you're dead in the water. You can't do the job. And I think that, and John, I think Don would agree. You just check your own emotions somewhere and get on with the job and do it fairly and do it accurately. Of course.
A case in point, we did a story on 60 Minutes on the Temple Mount Massacre, in which we reported that Jerusalem police had really done a job on a bunch of Arab kids and fired on them long after it had to happen. Abe Foxman wrote me a letter from the Anti-Defamation League, raising all kinds of hell on what we had done. 6 months later, when the Jewish court decided that it happened the way we reported it happened, I got a letter, which I still have, from Abe Foxman, apologizing and saying that, as it turns out, the official version of what happened is closer to what 60 Minutes reported than what the Israeli press had said. And I really admired him for that. And anyway, I love Abe Foxman. Everybody does.
Well, I want to talk a little bit more about that story. It was 1990, and you got a lot of flack.
Larry
Tell
Tish
us
called me
about
a self-hating Jew. And I said, Larry, you never met a more self-loving Jew in your life. I don't know what you're talking about. And there was, it got to be, I went to a party, and Barbara Walters and Maud Zuckerman got me in a corner and said, how could you do that story at this terrible time in Israel's history? And I said, that's funny. I don't remember you saying to me when we did the My Lai massacre at a terrible time in America's history. And this bit about, and I kept saying, why am I, because I didn't particularly care for some of the prime ministers, why am I a self-hating Jew? I don't like Richard Nixon. Nobody ever called me a self-hating American. And there's something about that it kind of disgusted me.
And did you, I mean, when you met, I think at that time, was it Foxman you met with, or Hertzberg, or somebody came to you and sat down with
Yeah,
you?
they wanted to kiss and make up, and he walked into my office and he said, Hewitt, there's got to be a Hurwitz under there somewhere. And I said, you son of a gun, you came here to make trouble. Anyway,
Did it bother you, though, being called a self-hating Jew? I mean, did it really?
No.
It really
And
didn't.
listen, the proudest thing I've got, and I keep bringing it out every time somebody starts saying that we were anti-Israel, is a letter I got on my 70th birthday from Yitzhak Rabin telling me how much they respected everything we did and wanted to wish me the best. And you even mentioned that in your book. And I don't have anything, I've led this charmed life, presidents and prime ministers and all that. Nothing ever touched me like that letter from Rabin. And the terrible thing that you all have to face at some point is Rabin was killed by a Jewish terrorist, not an Arab terrorist. And that is terrible to think about.
Morley, what do you, in terms of the power that 60 Minutes has had over the years, and the fact that I think Jews are clearly sensitive to, whether a program like that is going to portray Jews badly or portray Palestinians too well. I mean, were you conscious of that? I mean, do you think ever that there should be at least some thought in a reporter's head when you have that kind of power and that kind of influence? How is this going to affect?
I think as a Jew working on a broadcast like ours, you probably bend over excessively backwards, to be fair. I honestly believe that. And there may be some little defense mechanism. Nobody's going to accuse me of whatever. But still they accuse you. So I think we do. It's remarkable that, well, maybe it's not so remarkable in a city like this one, but the amount of space that's given to coverage of Israel. I mean, quite apart from intifadas, quite apart from all of that, I mean, there's more known about the GNP and every facet of practically every road accident in the country makes news. So in a certain way, it's under very intense scrutiny. And I think the New York Times also, in its coverage of Israel, tends to be, if there is such a thing, excessively fair sometimes.
But was 60 Minutes over the years, was the accusation that it was more anti-Israel, or
Yeah, get both.
it would get both?
You get both.
Because I remember both.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you get both.
You know, and
I did a profile of Teddy Kollek years ago.
I could tell a great story about that.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
And you know, he was a remarkable fellow.
I love that guy.
He you know, he would be over in Arab Jerusalem and just this great bull of a man, and he spoke Arabic with the shopkeepers, and there was it wasn't you can spot a phony when you spot a phony. There was something so really genuine. He was so much of that place, and of course I took all kinds of heat that it was pro-Israel, you get letters, you know, you must be a Jew, kind of letters, that kind of thing.
Let me tell you, it's a great Teddy Kollek story, and it had to do with a story Morley did. Teddy came to New York. I'd never met Teddy Kollek. My wife, who was here, Marilyn Berger, who had been on the Kissinger shuttle and spent all that time in Israel at the beginning, and at one point decided that's where she wanted to live, was an old friend of Teddy's. And once she was there, they gave her a birthday party. And Kissinger came, they were all there, and Teddy gave her a string of carnelian beads for her birthday. She got back to Washington, and she was at a dinner party, and Kay Graham was there, who owned the Washington Post. And Marilyn looked over at Nancy Kissinger and said, "Oh, Nancy, I know where you got those beads. Teddy gave me the same beads." Kay Graham shot her a look like would wither her, like, you're not supposed to take gifts from people you cover. She went to Ben Bradley the next morning, and she told him what happened, and he said, "Send them back." She said, "Ben, it's my birthday present from Teddy Kollek." He said, "Marilyn, send them back. You can't keep them." She sent them back. 5 years later, Morley was doing a story on Teddy, and we all had lunch at Orsini's. You and I, Marilyn came along, and Joe Wershba. In the middle of the lunch, Teddy looked over at Marilyn and said, "Do you still work for the Washington Post?" She said, "No, I don't work there anymore, Teddy." He said, "Good." Reached in his pocket. I brought you back the beads. That, to me, is Jewish.
You just said that you got, we would get letters like, "You must be a Jew." And when I was doing research for the book, and there were so many websites which would list the Jews of the media. And you guys were always at the top of the list, and, it would go, there's a lot of them. And
I didn't know there was such a list.
but there's also just a lot of Jews in the media. And even at 60 Minutes, the idea that there's you guys and there's...
Was Mike down as Jewish?
Mike was not always down
come
that
on.
list. But he's there, and a lot of the the senior Esther Garda Gaynor, Phil Scheffler. There were a lot of people at 60 Minutes in the top jobs that were Jews. I mean,
Wait a minute.
Is that just a...
Who makes up a list of who are the Jews in the media? I don't understand that. Where did that come from?
What I want to ask you, is it just a coincidence?
I'm sorry.
Do you think that there's anything to the fact that there's something that you all share that is, that you have in common, whether or not...
Circle.
Yeah, you described it as... Tell me what you mean by sacco.
I don't know what I mean by it. I've used it all my life, and I guess he's got it, and you've got it, and an awful lot of people I know have it, and I don't really know how to define it, except, I guess loosely, it's brains.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know. I think that
Know-how.
and you can't make these sweeping statements, but I do think that ideas and books and intellectual argument, and I'm using intellectual in the broadest sense, are so much, almost in the genes. You know, my father was a man who never got past the fourth grade or something like that. But he was an extraordinarily well-read man in 3 or 4 languages. So, I mean, what motivates people to do it? I mean, I don't know that it's a mere something as paltry as ambition, or something just so intense. I must tell you another. It's not a Teddy Kollek story. I don't know if anyone remembers Moish Perlman. Moish Perlman was Diane's spokesman in the Defense Ministry. And years ago, I had a very old friend from my London days named David Owen, who, by sheer happenstance and his predecessor dying very young, David was made Foreign Secretary of Britain, and he was, you know, it was very strange. A friend, was really a close friend, is now in this very, very high position. Anyway, I had done a couple of pieces on Rhodesia, and it was during that Rhodesia crisis and the boycott and everything else, and the British Foreign Secretary was at the center of it. And David had seen them, and he just absolutely went into a fury and wouldn't talk to me. And he, you know, his wife would secretly call us because it was all so strange. And at some point, David went on a state trip to Israel and was sitting with Diane and Moish Perlman, the spokesman for the Defense Ministry. And I got a letter from Moish, and he said, you know, he said, this guy, David Owen, couldn't stop talking about Rhodesia and about you had stabbed him in the back. He said, Rhodesia? Rhodesia? Gosh, it's Soros.
Before we leave the 60-minute stories, I wondered if you could just touch on briefly the Ukrainian kind of explosion and just tell the audience what happened with that story.
Well, I went to Ukraine with Jeff Fager, who was then a producer working for me, who's now the executive producer of Don's old office, to do a story. Originally, it was a story on that a young American stringer who had worked in Russia and Belarus and had visited the Ukraine, and he said there's a real sort of rising tide of fascism. And you know, Ukraine is an enormous place, and the Western Ukraine, which was the least Russified, as they call it, unlike Kiev, which was very Russian, and also the most backward and the most brutal history. Anyway, and it really, the story kind of evolved into, because the manifestation of this fascism was the most virulent anti-Semitism that I have ever witnessed anywhere. You know, there was some relationship somehow between that kind of anti-Semitism and real poverty and ignorance, and superstition. And we did the story, and
Ukrainians went crazy.
Well, you know, the concentration camp in what was Lvov and is now Lviv was the camp where Wiesenthal was originally, where his family was wiped out and his wife was lost. All of them victims of Ukrainian guards. Anyway, I did the story. I talked to the bishop about this legacy, and his Monsignor, who was an American, said, I just want to say that we Ukrainians are not genetically anti-Semitic. I used that line in peace. they said, I had said they were. I mean, this is how things get twisted. And they sent a delegation down. Who was president of CBS News then? I can't remember.
I think it was Ober.
What's his name, though?
Jim Burke.
Jim Burke, yeah. We've had many presidents in our lives. And, you know, they picketed the office, and we held fast, you know. There was not a hole in that story, so. But they still have a website where they condemn me out there somewhere. Yeah.
Don, just to get back, I think, to more of the, you talked about, there were a couple of things that you said, I think, that got people talking. I think it's a better world if everybody's integrated, you said, in regards to intermarriage. There are Jews who get horrified because a Jew marries out of their religion, and a lot of them are very liberal kind of people who think it's great when there are interracial marriages. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, yeah, intermarriage to me is not a sin, and I think that the more the races of the world intermingle, probably the better off we are for love and peace and happiness. I've been married 3 times. My present wife is Jewish. She would disagree with what I'm saying, I'm sure, but I really feel that an intermingling of different cultures is probably a good thing.
And you don't worry about Jews being a small population?
No, I worry about the decent people of the world becoming a small population.
You also said you feel that Jewish interests have been hurt by Jews who say that their suffering surpasses all others.
Yep. I was asked, you know, you asked me, you said you covered World War II as a war correspondent. What did you think of the Holocaust? I said, I thought it was ungodly, the worst thing I'd ever heard of. But then you've got blacks who say, well, we were lynched. Where was the outcry about that? Well, eventually there was one. I think that it is not a service to Judaism to assume that we're the only ones who ever suffered. And I mentioned, I once told that to Spielberg, who made a movie about the slave ship, Amistad, which was lousy. It was a lousy movie, but I don't think that was enough to do it. And I have a feeling that other people who have suffered from being what they are resent the fact that we think we have a monopoly on suffering. And we're not the only ones who have. We may have experienced it in ways that are so horrific that it's difficult to even imagine it ever happened, but we're not the only ones who ever suffered.
Forgive me, Don, you're setting up a straw man. I don't know a single Jew who's ever said anything like that. And if you look at We Suffer Too, the life of Elie Wiesel, who goes around talking about precisely what you're saying no one talks about. So that's just not true. I don't know a Jew, including, by the way, many survivors, fewer than I used to know, who ever even uttered, even suggested anything like that. The fact that Jews may say never forget is another matter. But they're not saying never forget this, but you can forget that.
I say it's an unspoken attitude. Elie
Well, if it's
Wiesel,
unspoken,
okay.
It's not said, and it's not even suggested.
Okay. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Let's open it to questions on that note. Can whoever, yes, and please speak loudly. And one thing I will say is the temptation for statements may be great, but please try to make them questions with a question mark on the end of them. Thank you.
Many Jews have been communists and socialists. Bill O'Reilly and Sean Hannity talk about left-wing socialism. What does that bring to your mind?
Not necessarily anti-Semitism. I mean, I think that there's a tendency to find anti-Semitism in things that are not necessarily anti-Semitic. They may be anti a lot of other things, but I think that's part of a yoke that we've never been able to sort of cast off.
Mr. Safer, do you feel the same
I just can't take anything Bill O'Reilly says. I mean,
He tried to hire me.
He's a buffoon. I don't think he has any agenda other than keeping his mug on television.
Yeah, but I don't think it's necessarily anti-Semitic. It may be stupid, but I don't think it's necessarily anti-Semitic. I don't think the New York Post is anti-Semitic.
Yes.
Murdoch is anti-Semitic.
Next question, sorry.
Murdoch.
Rupert Murdoch is anti-Semitic? I doubt that very
No,
seriously.
they just made him Jew of the Year.
He's not.
They did.
In the front row, thanks.
Mr. Hewitt, you said earlier that you felt that militant Muslims were more of a threat to civilization in general than to Jews in particular. But since an Iranian newspaper has just offered a contest to pick the funniest cartoon about the Holocaust, don't you think that this shows that militant Muslims do seek out persecution of the Jews more than any other group?
I think militant Muslimism is against any group that they think is a threat to their taking over the world. And right now, they probably think that Judaism stands between them and what they think is their rightful place in the world. And I think they're probably anti-everything that isn't Muslim. And I don't think we can turn everything into anti-Semitism. There's a lot of anti-everything else.
Well, the new president of Iran said that the destruction of Israel is the first battle in world domination. And
He
the most
says it, and a lot of other
important
ones
one.
think it. And that's the danger.
In the back, yes, sir. Really loud, please.
Thank you. If either of you saw the movie Munich, I just wanted to know what you thought about your criticism of Spielberg in terms of the Palestinians. If you haven't seen the movie, then obviously.
I saw the movie. I don't think it was a good movie. Outside of that, as far as the political implications of it, I didn't feel one way or the other that I don't think they had hurt the Israeli cause or hurt the other cause. I just thought it could have been a better movie.
Yes,
First off, I enjoyed the book very much.
thank you.
I wanted to come back because I was actually first curious about 60 Minutes' somewhat adversarial relationship towards Israel vis-a-vis Syria, but leave that aside, that's in the past. CBS, Edward R. Murrow, I always thought his finest album was not so much McCartney, but the reporting on the Blitz.
On the what?
The Blitz in 1940.
Yeah, I was there.
And that took real physical courage. William Shirer could have had an accident at any moment. The Danish cartoons, the editor of the paper, the guy who gets the coffee for that paper, they're on the run for their lives. And I think the performance of the media in the United States has been appalling and pitiful. And I'd like to know what your thoughts are on that.
I agree with you. I think that the performance of CBS is appalling in announcing up front that we will not show those cartoons. Now, I don't think whether we know what's in the cartoons or they get general circulation is really very important. It is clearly an act of cowardice by the newspapers, totally an act of cowardice, because they saw what happened in Denmark, they saw what happened in Holland with Ayaan Hirsi Ali, the woman who wrote the little film Submission, and Murder of Van Gogh. So I think that look, it's not an easy. I'm not suggesting it's an easy decision for a paper or a television network to make that decision to show those cartoons.
What would be your?
No, you want to know something?
I think in the end I would have to show them.
How come?
I mean, I would argue to show them.
Why?
I disagree.
Because it's a big story. That's why. It's a major story. Forget anything else. It is a major story. There are people dying. There are embassies being burned down, and we can't tell you really what caused this. We can describe it sort of, but we don't think we're just too sensitive to show those. Come on, I mean, you've all seen the cartoons, I'm sure. There's nothing
Don, why do you disagree?
horrible about it.
In a world full of Meshuggahs, it doesn't make any sense to go out and start to cause trouble. I would never, if I were the editor of that paper, I would have said absolutely not. You could be unleashing things that a lot of innocent people are going to get killed about because we think we have the right of freedom of the press. I'm sick and tired of this freedom of the press baloney.
Well,
I'm serious. There
It's not
is-
an issue of freedom of the
Of
press.
course, that they've been framing it that way, that they have the right to say.
It's an issue of self-censorship. We
It's a
dare not show anything that might...
Baloney. It's an issue of responsibility to the world that's in terrible, terrible trouble. A world that may
Because
not
of
tomorrow,
cartoons.
that may not be tomorrow
because
what
of
it is today.
cartoons.
Huh?
Because of cartoons. If the world is in
Yes,
that much deep
aren't you
shit
smart
over
enough? Would you have run it?
cartoons, well,
If you
might
were
as
running
well
60
all take
Minutes
the
and somebody
right.
came to you with those cartoons,
Yeah.
and you had a right to put them on the air, the CBS management said...
We don't put
"Mo-
cartoons on the air.
No,
We
let's
put
assume...
good stories on the air.
No, suppose...
This is a
that-
wonderful
all right,
story.
suppose these cartoons are a story. Have you run them on the air here? You don't want to cause more trouble in the world. This is a very troubled world. You got to be a lot more careful about your freedom of the press,
Nobody burned
freedom
the
of
Philadelphia
speech.
Inquirer down yet. They
Don't
published
do
them
it.
Yesterday.
A lot of people are going to get killed because of those damn cartoons. I care more about the people who are getting killed than the principle of freedom of speech or freedom of the press. There are
So-
lives at stake here.
Okay, question.
On every story we do, virtually of any importance, there are lives at stake.
Not
Good
like this
stories.
one.
Yes.
I just want to continue on this line of questioning because I think that we do make this kind of judgments all the time. When you are covering a war and you're sitting in a feed room and footage is coming in, you make decisions about what you're going to turn around and put on the air. You take some things out. You don't air certain things. By the same token, would you run the cartoons one time and never run them again? Would you say, I'm talking
Not me.
The-
you say you've never run them, but
I say run them. I don't think you keep running them. I think you keep running them is some kind of foolish provocation. I'm not suggesting that. There were qualms, but everyone ran the pictures of those Americans hanging from that bridge in Iraq, right?
the example I was going to use was the people jumping out of the World Trade Center, which we ran once or twice, and then we were told, don't run them again.
Do you realize the craziness that's abroad in this world today like never before? And you've got to figure, I'm not going to pour gasoline on this fire. I want to put this fire out. And to say I have the right to, because I have freedom of the press, to do certain
So
things.
if you don't,
This is pouring gasoline on a fire.
So then, what is the other gasoline you don't throw in the fire? What are the
well,
other?
that's the only one
Just
that-
tell me all those other things you don't report. If you're so fearful, you're so fearful.
I'm not fearful. I'm telling you, there are people dying, and there are embassies that are being bombed because some guy said, I have the right to publish these pictures. You know, that's one of the things that's wrong with journalists. They have this feeling about my rights, the freedom
Well,
of
it's
the press.
really an interesting story because, of course, these cartoons were published last September.
What's the
Nothing.
difference when they were? They're causing a lot of trouble in the world.
They were published last September. Not until there was a meeting of Arab heads of state, more or less, at Mecca, to which no non-Muslims are allowed, did these mad mullahs come out of that with this, having heard about this report from 3 or 4 months ago, and organized these, there's some kind of suggestion that there's this crazy spontaneous mob. It was beautifully orchestrated, the whole thing. And if you're not going to report the whole story, whether it's, I don't know that it threw any gasoline on the fire because other organizations published those pictures. The firehead was already burning, for God's sake.
Why don't you put them downstairs in the lobby here?
Why would you?
Because it would incite trouble.
Why would you?
What do you mean, why would you? If they're
Why
so
would you?
important, then people should see them and see what's going
I
on.
have to call on
Why don't you
Marilyn Berger,
Marilyn,
Don's
go
wife.
ahead. What?
You have now proven your
That's exactly right. You're absolutely right.
Is that true at home?
Don't make trouble is my byword.
But making
There's enough
trouble,
trouble in the world without going out and
but
creating
making
it.
trouble can be so much fun.
Dan,
For the guy who wasn't killed by it.
go ahead.
Anything like you were saying, there's a lot of trouble in this world, and there's a lot of factions in this world, and they are very serious, very scary right now. But it troubles me, actually, to think that because there is a group that is so militant and is so showing and tries to create such fear like the Taliban did with the people in Afghanistan, so much so that they had to hide their own film. Does it make it right because people try to make people so afraid to live a life to show freedom or to have freedom of the press or to say how they think? If people make us so afraid to do that, does that make it right? I mean that if we do those things, that we are then causing trouble, and in trying to say we're not showing that because God forbid somebody should get hurt, to me seems a really.
It's a pretty good reason for me.
And
What do you expect to accomplish? What do you think is going to be accomplished if you show those pictures? Don't you know they're out there? We know about them.
that did decide to show us what they said today on the radio, and I don't remember, it might have been the paper in Philadelphia. What they clearly said was, we showed it because we wanted people to see that it wasn't so bad. And what was causing this type of hysteria was not as bad as people were living.
It's as bad as the Muslims think it is, not what we
So
think
we
it is.
shouldn't have shown Abu Ghraib. That was
No,
even, that
Abu
was even
Ghraib
more
was our
potent.
own showing of our own
Yeah,
problems.
but that was even more potent gasoline than these. Than
You're damn
these
right.
Silly
But that was us.
caricatures.
We have a
What?
right to do that.
Yes, sir.
From them today the right to publish these pictures. What can happen tomorrow or day after tomorrow? There may be another issue that will come up that again everybody will start condemning.
No, kill them
Here,
others.
here.
I'm
I
all
agree
for
with
killing them, but I'm not for sure. I'm not for inciting more violence.
Yes, sir. In the back.
You know, the Jewish history has lasted for over 5,000 years. And, you know, that's a very long time. And when you talk about bringing up a family and bringing up children, Don, and not giving them a Jewish upbringing, what is it that you think is going to perpetuate the specialness of Jewish people? That's my first question. And the second part of the question is, you know, if not passing on a Jewish heritage onto the next generation, won't we eventually run out of the Jewishness? And isn't that, you know, itself an anti-Semitic thing? That if we're a party to ending what has always been so special to be a Jew, because we're not passing it on to our children.
Okay. Do you want me to be a hypocrite? Do you want me to be hypocritical and say that I believe in all those things that you just said if I don't? I am being honest with you. I'm not pretending. This is what I feel. It's not what you feel. It's not what I expect anybody else to feel. I don't expect Morley to feel it. I don't expect Abby to feel it. I don't expect anybody else here to feel it. I was asked to come here and talk about, and when she came to me as far as the book was concerned, to talk about what it is that I feel inside me. And I did that honestly. Now, do you want me to make up a lot of Bubameises? I can do that. That's easy. That's very easy. That's in your mind. That's not in my mind. That's not in my heart and mind.
You said it in your opening statement, your written opening statement.
Yeah.
You really sort of professed that you were a Jewish kind of guy, and that you know, had some type of feeling for the Judaism that you have, and that is a special thing. And I'm saying to you, isn't it really, and I don't mean to be insulting, I only mean to ask a question, and I respect that that's how you feel. Isn't it really an anti-Semitic flavor that you pass on by saying that I'm not going to educate my people, my children, in Judaism? Can't you see where that naturally, that the Judaism will run out? That being special comes from a heritage of 5,000 years of studying, and it isn't a gene. It's not an automatic thing. like Mr. Safer said before, you went to a congregation one time and you saw all different colors of Jewish people, but they all had to study to be Jewish.
Okay.
They all had to have a foundation.
Okay.
You made the point.
Okay, I think the point's made. Someone
Great
else.
speech.
Go ahead,
I
in the back.
applaud you. You
In the
said
back.
that very well. I applaud you for saying what you had to say. Very well. You want to come up here?
Oh, Don.
Okay. In the back, in the back.
To each their own in religion, and literally 99.9% of what Mr. Hewitt said, I agree with, the exception of the censorship part. But is religion taking over America? That's what my question is. It's not Judaism, is religion taking over America? Because that's what scares me as one of the younger people here, is that the media is shifting so much to religion, and I would love your comments on that.
More.
Is religion taking over? No, I don't think so. I think the coverage of the evangelicals are a very, very powerful group. They're not as large as people think they are, but they do form a bloc. I think this country has such talent for sort of balancing itself and writing itself that that doesn't concern me. I mean, what concerns me, frankly, is having the increasing sense of having mullahs in the White House. That's what concerns me. Not so much out there across the country, because I think, and please don't jump on me, but the scariest thing about fundamentalism is that the people who exercise it are so stupid, whatever kind of fundamentalist they are, whether they're Jewish or Muslim, and certainly evangelical Christians, as we've come to learn. It's the ignorance that scares me more than anything else. Not in this country, not the militancy, but the ignorance.
I want to thank everybody. We really have to stop. And I just want to say a personal note that I really did set out in this book to ask people who are very busy and obviously have no reason to have to sit down with me, to be honest. And I appreciate in both of these cases that they were with great affection and gratitude.
Thank you.
Thank you.